Millions of frontline workers keep our economy running and are provided with the latest technology to do their jobs. But digital adoption, especially by frontline workers, is really hard.
This is Frontline Innovators. We explore how to overcome challenges and achieve success when we empower our essential workers.
I'm Justin Lake.
And I'm Gene Signorini. Together, we speak with experts who are leading the way and driving digital transformation to the front line.
This podcast is sponsored by Skillful, on a mission to help frontline workers learn and use the technology needed to succeed in their jobs. I'm your host, Justin Lake, and I'm really excited for today's episode. Today's guest is a transformational leader passionate about continuous learning, people empowerment, and driving change. She improves customer and employee experiences through human-centered design and technology enablement. She leads OCM strategy development and execution for major corporate initiatives and engaging training. She's currently the Senior Manager of Change Management at Sprouts Farmers Market, one of my favorite grocery stores. Please welcome Andrea Johnson. Hello, Andrea.
Hey, Justin. Thanks for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Really excited about the conversation we're going to have today. And I want to jump right into it as we usually do and ask to get your perspective on what you think is the biggest challenge you see facing the deskless workforce today.
For me, I think it's the speed of change, all the changes coming at frontline workers, and not having the best understanding of what's in it for them. It's a lot easier to digest change if you understand why it's happening and how it's going to benefit you. And a lot of times that message doesn't get down to them to connect all those dots.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. We talk a lot about the speed of change, especially as it relates to technology. But I think even over the last year and a half, I mean, as a society and as workers, we've all changed so dramatically over the last year and a half because of this pandemic that it's just, even what was fast before has now just been sped up quite a bit. And I do think that they're on the receiving end of a lot of that change. So I think that's a really interesting point you bring up. Well, let's talk a little bit about your background. Tell us about your role at Sprouts and what you spend your time doing there.
All right. Well, I started my career in digital product marketing and user experience research. And, we had these huge teams around developing these products for our customers so they could use the technology efficiently, and it was enjoyable and useful and usable. But then you look at the systems we provide team members in-house, and there's no UX on them, and they're out of the box and, coded by a coder who is speaking in their language and not the end user's language. And so when from that, I became very passionate about organizational change management, and specifically around technology and how it impacts our team members and productivity and morale and turnover.
Why do you think when you talk about UX with these workers, I think it's a great point. We talk about this all the time in our business, that the consumerization of IT hasn't really made it to frontline workers in the same sense, right? And I think part of that is that, in the consumer market, we are the decision maker and we're also the consumer of that technology, right? So we're making individual decisions for ourselves. In the corporate environment, the people who are being asked to use this technology on the front lines were not involved in the decision. Do you think that impacts the investment in UX?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Anything that you noticed along the way of ways that could be improved when we're thinking about, deploying technology to the front lines?
Well, getting their feedback, understanding their job, their role when you're developing the product itself, or if it's kind of an out of the box solution, while you're developing the communications, the training, the support plan for that.
Yeah.
When you look at frontline workers, a lot of times they don't have, direct access to a computer or email. And so when you're asking them to, to find support, that's a bigger ask than someone who's sitting at a desk behind their laptop all day.
Yeah. How did you make the shift from user experience design and product development into OCM?
I had a mentor who recruited me, and said, Andrea, I've got the perfect job for you. It's organizational change management for this big digital transformation we're going through. And I kind of sat back and thought, well, but I'm a product marketer, and at the end of the day, organizational change management is marketing to your internal employees. And it's a little bit more difficult because they know what's behind the curtain, and they've gotten, some of them have PTSD from previous technology launches where they, where things didn't go so smoothly. I mean, because let's face it, not every technology launch has some type of hiccup. And when you're on the receiving end of that, because the first time you saw it was the day that it launched, it can be pretty painful and
Yeah.
have a lot of repercussions there.
Did you make the move into change management at Sprouts, or was that before you landed at Sprouts?
No, this was when I worked for Fedex Freight.
Okay.
So there they were going through a very big digital transformation on their docks and for their drivers, to add a ton more automation in, than originally had. And so that's where I started and where that passion grew. And I'm all change management all the time now.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, and you and I touched on this a little bit as we were preparing for today's episode, that there are a lot of common threads between change management and user experience, right? We're in both practices, we're trying to put ourselves in the shoes of the user and really make sure that we understand, the world from their perspective. Do you think that your background in user experience has maybe changed the way that you perceive change management as compared with your colleagues and others in the profession?
Absolutely. As a product marketer, you're with that product all the time. Or as you're preparing to launch something, the ins and outs of that product. But once you get it in front of the end user and they start thinking that, oh, well, this button, surely, this is the button I click to move forward in this process. And you really get those aha moments. And so you just can never make assumptions, that the way that you perceive something is the way that your end user is going to perceive it.
Yeah. So what makes this so I hear a lot of passion in your voice about the end users, and so it's clear in both the previous role and then the role that you're in today, very end user centric. What is it that brings so much passion to you about working with those workers in that way?
Well, I mean, I like to help people. I think a lot of people do, and it's nice to see their, when you've done something and their eyes light up, and you see everything click, and, oh, this is going to make my job easier. And, I will be able to do this. This is not going to be as hard as I thought. And so it's all that, putting yourself in their shoes, and putting the forethought into what's the easiest way that I can get these folks to adopt this new system, this new process, and minimize the disruption for everything else that's going on, with their day job. Because at the end of the day, this system might be the biggest thing that the IT organization is launching right now, but out in the stores, they're still trying to keep the shelves full and the customers happy, and this is just more noise in the background for them.
That's one of the things I've witnessed what you just described a lot. I think a lot of times these big digital transformation initiatives, they are coming down from the top. There's a heavy, participation from IT, a lot of, fantastic, amazing professionals in the program and project management space. And I say this with all due respect, but they're kind of working a Gantt chart and, timelines and checklists, right? And I think a lot of times the human element of that change is left out. And, we find that to be, it can become the weakest link, not because the employees aren't capable, but because we probably haven't paid it as much attention, right? I think change management and training seem to be at the tail end. They always seem to be the first things to get cut when budgets are tight and timelines are tight. And yet it's the most critical thing is the employee adoption. If we've invested, millions or tens of millions of dollars in new technology and we don't have engagement by the users, it's all for naught.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, what do you think? Have you learned any ways to kind of help make a better business case for change management when you're seeing these big transformations come, or maybe in the organizations that you've worked for, since they have OCM professionals on board, maybe that business case hasn't needed to be made? What are your thoughts on that?
You hit on it right there. We're investing, $1 million, $2 million, $10 million into this new system. But at the end of the day, if people aren't using it, that ROI is zero.
Yeah.
And so convincing them that, you're not going to get the return, the street's not going to be happy, if we're not getting the return on this because folks aren't using it.
I've literally been through experiences where, I was involved in the technology side of things, and the company spent, 6 months debating and testing different barcode scanners to see which one was going to scan barcodes faster, and then we get all the way out to the end and the training period has been compressed. The investment is compressed, the implementation is just sped through. So we've wasted a lot of time and money, trying to evaluate, splitting hairs between two manufacturers' barcode scanners. And we left out, which by the way, probably wouldn't have made that much of a difference in the overall success of the program. And then we leave out all of the attention to detail on how we're going to ensure engagement and ensure, successful adoption of the technology. And I think that's such a shame. So it's always refreshing to talk to folks that are in your profession where their organizations are supportive of that. And, they're making the proper investments to really think about the implications of that throughout these transformational exercises.
Absolutely.
What are the things that you do outside of work? I know we got started talking about work and your job, but what do you do outside of work that you bring passion to?
Well, I am on the board of the Arizona chapter of Association of Change Management Professionals. So like I said, I'm all change management all the time.
So in work and outside of work, you're thinking a lot about OCM. That's fantastic though. Tell me more about the organization.
Yeah. So we, work together to help evangelize organizational change management methodologies throughout the valley, the Phoenix Valley, and especially helping some of the nonprofits that may not have the budget to have change management professionals to make sure that the things that they're doing are resonating with their end users and they're getting that return on investment.
That's fantastic. The nonprofit piece is a really good point because they tend to be resource constrained, but they're going through just as much transformation as anybody else. So what you guys are doing there sounds like really good work. Do you, in that organization, I'm curious, do you talk at all about, I mean, you and I just touched on it very briefly about the high level business case. Hey, we're going to spend $10 million on this project. Why wouldn't we focus on the end users? But have you learned any strategies, or does that group discuss any strategies about how to actually put together that business case? I mean, the simple math is, hey, we don't want to lose $10 million because we didn't spend X number of dollars, on training and other communication plans and things like that. But is there any more insights that you can share with us about how to actually go about that process?
Yeah, and I think it's also, history is your greatest teacher. Looking at past launches, past investments that you've made, and what went right, what went wrong, and did people challenges result in not getting the results you hoped for immediately. So looking at because like I said, and your end users have some PTSD from horrible rollouts, but your executives have too. They're getting yelled at by their boss and by the board as well to get it done on time or and on budget. So
I had an experience. I was a consultant on a project with a large utility company, and we talked about this. There was a pretty major digital transformation initiative going on, and I was in the room with a bunch of employees that had been with the company for a couple of decades. And you talk about the PTSD, or just the mental scar tissue that they had. We talked about how we were going to implement the change, and I won't get into all the details of this, but these are the folks from corporate, and literally a few people in the room kind of snapped back at me about how we were talking about managing the change. And they said, "You just don't understand. You've not been in the field with our workers," and they kind of went on with this whole thing. And so it's really interesting to see the emotions that come up both with frontline workers and the folks up at corporate as we're trying to drive this change. And they weren't just being stubborn. Of course, everybody was kind of rowing in the same direction in terms of wanting to make the change, but there was a lot of legacy scar tissue there about those bad experiences in the past, and they were trying to right the ship a little bit. So I think you're right. I think first time initiatives are always the hardest to convince people to take a step back and look at things more broadly. But when they have some previous experiences, it probably makes it a little bit easier to go through that.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, let's go back to the main challenge we spoke about in the beginning. When I asked you what you felt was the biggest challenge facing, the deskless workforce, you specifically talked about the speed of change, and I agree with you that that's definitely one of the things that we see, a lot in our experience, is just that the pace of change is really causing a lot of challenges for that. I'm for frontline workers in particular, and I would think the change management, just the strategies around change management would be an opportunity to ease the burden of that. I'm curious to hear what you're doing to help address that challenge of, we can't slow down. It's not okay to take our foot off the gas. So we have to keep that pace of change up. What are some of the tools and techniques that you're using to help ease the burden on some of the, the people on the receiving end of that change?
So one, it needs to be all hands on deck. You need your change champion network that is peers or maybe just the frontline leaders of the folks that are absorbing this change, involved and bought in, because they can really relate to how this is going to impact these frontline workers, and can give you a good temperature check on, oh, this is going to work or this isn't going to work. But then you also need that buy-in from all levels of leadership. As well as anyone that if your leadership isn't bought in, that just rolls downhill, and your ultimate end user is not going to be bought in either. They might think that it'll just go away, or they can continue doing it their own way, or they'll figure out a workaround to avoid doing this. But ultimately, your frontline workers, especially related to technology, you have 5 generations in the workforce. So there's not a one size fits all OCM plan, rinse, repeat. You have to, one, account for all the generations and learning styles, how readily they are to embrace technology and respond different ways. Some people want to get help different ways. Some people don't want to sit in an instructor-led training. They'd rather just have some bite-sized videos online. And so it's really understanding the audiences and their pain points with the current state, and figuring out how to make that case for them that, it might be a little painful at first, nothing's going to go without its hiccups, but at the end of the day, when we get through this, we're going to, make your job easier, be more productive, whatever those benefits are. And they truly have to believe it. And in order for them to believe it, everyone up the chain has to believe it as well.
One of our other guests said something that you just reminded me of this when you were explaining that about the communications from senior level execs. And if you think about, perhaps what the CEO may say to a team of employees about why this is important, and they may mention things like profitability and shareholders and public markets and a bunch of other things that some of the employees care deeply about. But many of the frontline workers won't care at all about that. What do you think about that challenge? Is there a case to be made that communication should be coming down, differently for frontline workers than perhaps some of the others in the organization, or should it be the same message that to make sure that everybody's saying the same thing about the same digital transformation topic?
Um, well, obviously, the audience matters, and so if the CEO is talking about, how we're going to, raise our shareholder value, that's great. But all of the benefits at each level need to be communicated and understood thoroughly, so that they can talk about it. So if your CEO is out walking the dock or out in one of your stores, that if they get asked by a frontline employee, well, why are we implementing Workday, or why are we doing this? His response isn't, oh, because the shareholders want it and we want to raise the stock price. It's, oh, because it's going to allow us to go paperless, and you're going to be able to access, all this stuff without having to talk to HR to get something done, or it's going to speed up what you do each day. Although sometimes that's a double-edged sword, because you have, that fear of being replaced by technology. So, the fear of being replaced by technology, or the fear of not knowing or feeling like they won't be able to learn the new technology and ultimately be replaced because of that.
I've sat in a lot of meetings in, headquarters and conference rooms where we talked about, different technology initiatives. And in very few of those cases over a couple of decades was the investment being made so that they could reduce headcount, right? And yet somehow the field often feels that the reason the technology is being invested in is so that they can be made more efficient, so that they don't need as many of them, right? And I don't blame them for feeling that way. I just I wish that we could all do a better job of helping them understand that, yes, are we trying to squeeze more productivity out of the field? Of course we are. That's, we're running a business, and that's part of what we're always going to try and do here. But it doesn't have to be at the cost of your job. We're actually trying to help you be more effective and more successful in the role. And I don't think we always do a great job of getting that message out to them. And maybe I think in some organizations, it may just be a little bit of a trust issue, even if those
Mhm.
words are said. The employees may not necessarily believe it. But it's, it's something that I think we all need to continue to press on, because, it's kind of the what's in it for them, right? We've got to be able to do a better job of addressing that and take away some of their fears and concerns.
Yeah, like the digital transformation at Fedex Freight, that was so that we could handle more freight. It wasn't so that we could have fewer people.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and a lot of the workforces that we're talking about today, these organizations are struggling to hire more people. They're not
Mhm.
trying to get rid of people; they're trying to hire more people. So, the sooner you can get up to speed, Mr. or Mrs. Frontline worker, on this technology, and the sooner you can be successful, the sooner you can be in a good place in your role, and, make room for the others to come into the organization. So it's, I know times are a little bit different right now because we've got so many people just changing, industries and changing roles and things like that. But I think this issue has been around for a long time, and just collectively, I know I'm making some pretty broad generalizations here, but I think collectively, all of us that are involved in digital transformation have a responsibility and an opportunity to improve the way that we communicate to those frontline workers. And it sounds like you're already, well on that path.
Absolutely. At Sprouts, there's a host of channels that we have, and I'm all for, put it in the playbook, send an email, give the talking points to the managers, because, sometimes, people are out, or they didn't have a chance to be at, that stand-up meeting with their leader before their shift. And so you have to hit them with every channel that you have. It's unfortunate to hear, oh, no, we're not going to, no one reads email anymore, so we're not going to send that. Well, some people do. So
yeah, well, and okay, if that's the case, let's take your assumption for a minute as if it's fact, right? Then what's the plan B? Because not communicating should not just be considered acceptable, right? So if they don't have access to email, or they're not going to read the email, then what's the plan B? But not communicating shouldn't be, a viable, option.
Right. And another thing about your frontline workers is that a lot of times, because they don't have email and they're not sitting in front of a laptop all day, their primary source of information may be from their leaders, from their direct managers. But a lot of times those leaders weren't, they were in the job, the frontline job previously, and they were good at it, and so they got promoted because they were good at the old job, not because they were great leaders and great communicators. So that's why it's very important to focus on leadership development as well, and making it just as easy as possible, giving them those talking points, or those FAQs, so that the manager doesn't have to make up a reason. But of course, I don't know is always, it's an I always preach this, that I don't know is an acceptable answer, as long as that's followed up with, but I will find the answer for you, to close that loop.
Yeah, no, I think that's really a good point. And making sure that they know how to get that support, both at the manager level as well as the frontline workers themselves. I think that's huge. We've actually talked about that lately on a few of the other podcasts, that being able to communicate and really help users understand what's going to happen when the project team isn't here. What happens if you don't have a colleague to go over and ask, right? You and I talked when we were preparing for today about, some field workers really feeling like they're out on an island. And so, to ease the burden for them and to reduce some of their anxiety and stress about being left out on an island, to make sure that we communicate with them about how and where you go to figure out what you need to do, really seems to help reduce that anxiety quite a bit, so that they're not just dependent on the implementation team, who's there for a couple of weeks when you're rolling out new technology, that there are going to be resources available to you, and we're not going to leave you out on an island.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that we did at Sprouts, we've used WalkMe, which kind of is an overlay for a lot of systems, where it'll guide you through, or you can include some of those user guides or FAQs right inside the technology that you're launching. So they have that at their fingertips, and it's not, okay, get on a call and wait 30 minutes for a response, or submit a ticket. That's my favorite one. Like, yeah. Submit a ticket and one day we'll get back to you.
Someday, maybe.
Yeah. So, that's just not realistic. It's especially if you've got, one person doing the job. They don't have a peer that they can ask, because, they're the only one that does this job for this shift. And so they need to be able to help themselves. So anything you can do to enable that, even if it's best, I'd rather not use paper if I didn't have to, but sometimes at Fright, when we were launching things, it would just be handouts that we would give them. And granted, after 3 days, those were smashed on the floorboard of the truck,
Right.
but they did their job for that day or two while they were getting going and getting through that learning curve. And so you just have to meet them where they're at, because the help ticket queue isn't always a viable option.
That's not going to be viable. Yeah. And, you mentioned the use of a digital adoption platform with WalkMe. Share with us what's worked well with that. What would you do differently if you could do that over again? I'd like to pick your brain on that a little bit.
So WalkMe is great, but you really need someone that not only knows the system that you're implementing, but also WalkMe, so you can respond to the needs of team members as you start getting questions. You can add those things in very quickly, and hopefully, the purpose of WalkMe is that everything is so self-explanatory, but it still needs to be promoted as well, that this is a source of help for the team members.
Yeah. Are you using that on mobile applications or your point of sale system or any other applications like that? Or are you primarily using that for web applications inside Sprouts?
Just web applications.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. You mentioned before, I wanted to just get your take on this a little bit more, that folks don't want to sit in instructor-led training sessions in a classroom, and I can certainly relate to that. I don't want to either. And that there's a preference for videos. I would say, like, we're in the YouTube generation now. It really doesn't matter how old you are, if you're 75 or 25. Most of us now, when we are trying to learn something new, the first place that many of us go is to YouTube to go see if there's a quick 3-minute video about something, right? What would your advice be on how to do that from a video standpoint? Have you learned any best practices about kind of what's working with that media and what's not working, and how you're distributing that and things like that?
Yeah, definitely bite size, 30 seconds to 2 minutes, tips and tricks like that. I mean, we do have some pretty complicated, complex systems at Sprouts, where it does just require instructor-led training, but obviously there's a cost to that. And during COVID, that's had to go online as well. And so we are seeing a lot of results with those short bite-size reminder clips. At Freight, we had, with Exonify, that also used some of our some data that we were able to target users that were not as proficient in some areas, to send some of those videos out to them and use the gamification there.
That makes a lot of sense. So you actually were looking at how users were doing their job. You had some performance metrics, and from that, then you would kind of to pull up then new training content for them that was based on where they had some gaps.
Yeah. So like some of the driver rules, or the different hazardous material signs that you had to have out, things like that, that that repetitive and the gamification of it made it more fun to learn, and the companies getting a win out of that as well, because they're helping to reinforce those things that they're not as proficient at.
Of course. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Do you think that there are technology adoption differences between frontline workers? In your case, you've talked about examples from FedEx Freight and from Sprouts versus, what we call traditionally, knowledge workers, or, workers that are working at a desk with more traditional desktop applications. Do you think that there's a difference from a change management perspective about how we should be handling those two circumstances?
I do, because though someone is very tech savvy at home, with their TV or their video game console, when it comes to work, that's a whole different ball, because that's where my paycheck comes from. And if I screw this up, they may not feel at liberty to experiment as much, especially when they're on the clock. And there are some parts of frontline workers' jobs that are so repetitive, it's just built into their muscle memory. We used to have a system that the data entry folks at Freight, they knew how to do that without looking at their keyboard and tabbing through everything. We came in and we put this, modern system in where they had to use their mouse, and boy, that threw them for a loop. They were just so used to tabbing through, this old DOS system, and then where the UX folks would be like, oh yeah, this is going to be great, and they're going to be so efficient at this. That the learning curve was really long for them. So folks that aren't sitting using technology in the same way, that's definitely a challenge.
The point you just raised makes me think about the fact that when we have an existing team that's been using some solution that's existed in the business for some time, and we're implementing new technology to replace it, the change management challenge is saying, here's the way it was before, and here's the way it's going to be now. But that's different when we have new hires coming into the organization that never saw the old system. And I'm curious if you have any perspectives on, how to really go about making sure that new hires get kind of a clean slate version of the story versus, the change of, going from old to new. Anything we can learn from you on that?
So when you're creating your training plan, that's definitely something to take into consideration for current team members versus new hires, and what part of that history can be cut out, and you can fast forward through that. They might not need your new hires might not need to know the history or the why behind the change. But yeah, like we had talked about earlier, it's the folks that have been there a while that have seen the company go through different iterations and hiccups of a technology implementation that hurts.
Yeah. Now you've had a pretty, most of your career has been working in and around technology. What do you love about working with technology, and what do you really hate about it?
I love that there's always something new and different, so it keeps it exciting. What I hate, a recent example with Workday, I don't know the ins and outs, and it takes a long time to change a process. When something seems so simple, like why couldn't we just have this step before this step and call it a day? Well, when it's a tool as robust as Workday, there's a lot of downstream implications, and it takes really intimate knowledge of the system to understand that, and to craft some of those FAQs and the why behind, why is this developed the way that it is? Why are you making me do something that used to take 3 steps, now it takes 7 steps? But there's a reason for it, because it impacts 17 other processes over here, and they need those other steps. And so that is frustrating for me if we're just looking at one piece of it. I want to learn the whole thing, and sometimes there's just not time for that.
I mean, in my day job, we have a software company and we get frustrated by that too, right? We actually had an internal call today talking about, some things from a user experience standpoint that we'd really like to change. And, changing a little bit from like the user interface itself would actually be pretty easy. But the downstream implications, exactly as you said before, there are so many other things for us to consider. And most of the team here would argue that I'm very impatient. And, so, and they're probably right. I get frustrated because it seems like visually the change should be so relatively easy. And I am very sensitive to the needs of the workers themselves, the users of the technology. And so I want to be able to make that change very quickly. But, the engineering team always comes back and has to, explain all the implications of the architecture and stuff. So I share your frustration on that. On the other hand, I would say, when I think about the joys around technology, the positive side of that is that it's not like building a factory or in your case, building a retail store where if we want to change things out, just to say, hey, I really think we should have put the butcher shop over here and put the dairy section over here. Well, that's, you're not probably going to change that for some number of years in a retail environment. But in software, it may not happen this week, it may not happen this quarter, but typically we can make those changes pretty quickly. So there are definitely some pros and cons to that, but I certainly see your point on that. So we're getting close to wrapping up here. I knew the time was going to fly. It always seems to in these conversations, but I'm really curious to understand how you learn more about your profession. So you're clearly very passionate and very knowledgeable about, organizational change management. I'm curious if there are events that perhaps you used to attend or maybe are still attending. We're trying to get a sense for kind of where's everybody hanging out and trying to get, to continue on the professional development path, post COVID, where some of the things that we used to do are maybe not an option right now.
Well, I'm a voracious reader, so I I follow a ton of different organizations on LinkedIn. So I'm laying in bed scrolling through LinkedIn most nights, and then the blogs like Fast Company or ProSci, or the Association of Change Management Professionals, um, and you know I like to I've just been a lifelong learner and like to understand things. So, there's even things on like on LinkedIn. I follow the World Economic Forum. They're always sharing, interesting things. Like something that just came across today was by 2025, 50% of us are going to have to reskill or upskill in our job. I mean, and I would say that's kind of a conservative conservative guess, but it's just just even little snippets, little bite size nuggets that I get from reading blogs, and I've worked with a couple of great change management companies in the past. Tier 1 Performance Solutions is one of my favorite. They have a great blog, and I have learned so much from them. I'm ProSci certified, so they're always sending out new stuff. And when you get certified, I think they give you about 5 or 6 different books, and so reading all those cover to cover. And
yeah. That's awesome. So I think part of the answer to your question is events aren't in the cards for you.
No,
Yeah.
I mean, they used to be, but not anymore.
Yeah. I think that's an area where we're going to see some permanent change. I think I've been talking to some folks around the industry who have been, participating in some events. ATD just had an event up in Salt Lake City, I guess probably about a month ago now, or at least a few weeks ago. And it sounds like attendance was, way down, but they did have an in-person event for those folks that wanted to participate. So I think everything's changing going forward. And, I hate the new normal. I kind of hate that expression. And yet I find myself using it. But I think the new normal is that it's going to be more of a blended approach for all of us from a professional development and networking standpoint. So for us, our solution to that was let's create a podcast and start, if we can't all be together in the same room, at least we can create an audience of folks where we can have great conversations like the one that we had today. and kind of bring that audience together here. So hopefully you'll continue listening to the other podcasts as well.
I do.
Fantastic. Good. Okay. Well, we're going to wrap it up there. I hope you found this conversation as enjoyable as I have today. And if so, please share and rate the podcast. 5-star ratings help ensure that it gets promoted to other professionals like you that are innovating on the front lines. This podcast is sponsored by Skillful, the mobile digital adoption platform for deskless and frontline workers. Visit the website at skillful.com. That's SKYLLFUL.com. And if you or someone you know is out there innovating on the front lines, we'd love to hear about it. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn and share your story, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you, Andrea.